Hey, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it may be for you. Soc 212, Sociology, Race, Class, Gender. Professor Barry here. Purpose of this video is to give you a little bit of an overview about the class, kind of the content, where we're going to be, what is sociology, just to kind of orient you before we get started in the term. And then each week I provide an overview video of the content. Usually it's maybe addressing specific terms, theories, ideas that are helpful for understanding the readings or the video or podcast for the week. Um, Super essential to watch those overview videos before you get into the content. It'll make the content make more sense. It'll establish a purpose for the readings, course materials, the podcast, videos, whatever it may be. And I think that'll be really helpful as you prepare for the weekly assignment, which is a summary over the content for the week. So, sociology, first of all, like, okay, what is the sociological approach? And then how are we going to apply, are we going to apply that to the study of race, class, gender, and sexuality? So sociology is, by definition, it's the study of society, the systematic study of society. So ology means the study of, and soc, the study of society. So we're going to talk about society. What does that mean? Well, it's talking about culture, talking about social structure and institutions, the legal system, education system, criminal justice system, the government, major systems, and looking at a systematic examination of society. And if you got it, we're going to be examining how do these systems operate in ways that at times reinforce inequalities, come out of a place of inequality and reinforce them, whether those inequalities are social class, race, or other dimensions. So we're gonna part of sociology, so it's a systematic examination, and we're gonna address this interrelationship between the micro level, which is more individual level, and sociology doesn't really deal with the individual as much as trying to understand patterns among individuals and understanding things that go on more at the local level versus institution structure, which is more macro level. So if I'm looking at micro level, we're going to look at things like self-identity, looking at meaning, understanding, language. This is going to be more micro level. And then we're going to move into the macro level. We're going to examine institution, structure, culture. And there's an interrelationship between these two different things. So, for example, gender identity, racial identity, regardless if a person's a member of the dominant group or uh, a minority or non-dominant group, that we all have identities. And that identity formation is different for individuals, whether they're a part of the majority group or not. And so there's a micro level process going on in terms of identity development, but it's being influenced and shaped by a larger social, cultural context, that macro level. So sociology is trying to wrestle with both, trying to understand more individual small group processing, thinking about patterns among individuals and groups, and then addressing the larger macro level. So it's looking at that interrelationship. And ultimately, this is, to study society and study the systems in order to make improvements. So it's not only to understand, but it's also to make social change. Now, of the academic disciplines, I mean, sociology originated as at least in the Western world, as an academic discipline to study society during a time period of rapid transformation that was going on with industrialization, urbanization. And the hope was that sociology, having this discipline to study society, could provide some perspective and analysis that could help shape institutions and structures and society in ways that would help address various social problems that were increasing at that time. So it has a focus on not only understanding but also social change. And I think that's important to recognize. Some academic disciplines don't have that particular component, Although I would argue that all disciplines, whether it's biology, chemistry, physics, has some element of social change that are built in it. It's just within sociology, we're talking about social change, changing institutions, changing, an analysis, and then sort of a model of change. So the first couple weeks determine week one, we start off with, okay, here's sociology, here's the theories, the three theories. It could get incredibly complicated. We're just trying to touch down some basic ideas about these three theories. If you've had Soc before, great. If you haven't, that's totally fine. I think for those who've had Soc, it'll be more familiar territory. You're reinforcing what you already know, and or being sort of just recalling kind of content from previous classes. If it's all new to you, you're just grabbing onto new theories, concepts, and ideas. So in the first week, we're getting touching mildly into race, class, gender, but it's more about what is sociology, what's the discipline, and I think that framework's important so that you understand, the approach we're taking in the class. You understand like the field of sociology, kind of what it's about, moving away from like individual level things to look at uh, history, culture, society. Think about white nationalism. Think about political perspectives. Think about reactions to critical race theory, the history of critical race theory. We're going to, move away from individual actor level understandings to understanding things at a much more macro level. And as I mentioned, course is structured so that those without previous exposure to sociology will be more than fine. So anxiety levels down, no worries if you have not had sociology before. Then in week two, we moved to this model called the Matrix of Domination model, a model that was developed by African American academic Patricia Hill Collins, which is a super valuable model of understanding interrelationships between privilege and domination. And this model, I think, is something you can put in your back pocket. You can carry with you throughout not only this class, but afterwards. And it provides a wonderful model that addresses various components in trying to understand this interrelationship between privilege and domination. So advantage and disadvantage. And these things are related. So we can't have one without the other. And, historically in the United, probably not only in the United States, but probably in most other places where the communities and society and government has focused their attention is where are people being disadvantaged? That's one conversation. Another conversation is where do we see advantaging going on? Now, that's going to be a different conversation. To create a more democratic, a more just social world and environment, we have to talk about both the disadvantage, the inequalities that exist at a disadvantage level, and also the levels of privilege that happen as well. And that's going to be a different conversation. Those that are in positions of privilege are in a unique position to advocate for social change. So we talk about things like anti-racism, so individuals who have access to institutions to be an agent of change. At the same time, to recognize the kind of the challenge of challenging privilege is that oftentimes, first of all, people may not recognize privilege that they have, and two, that it's going to be harder to give up. But this matrix model facilitates a more complex understanding about systems of advantage and disadvantage. And then week three and on, we start with examination of different aspects of race, including white identity. And then we move into to gender, a little bit about sexuality, and then move into social class, and then bring things together and looking at different social policies. So that's the framework for the class where we're going. So the content includes readings, podcasts, films. I'm building this in the shell and mod in the shell within the class, adding additional content. I have a lot of different articles from previous classes when I taught this class in a face-to-face environment. Um, and so there's a lot of information. I'm not sure I'll be able to get it all on Canvas before the start of the term. But if you're ever interested in more information or curious about additional resources, let me know and I can share those with you. But for the content for this class, readings, podcasts, films, podcasts can be really useful because you hear from the author And I think that can help break things down. Sometimes if we're reading, for example, there's an article on the called Good White People was the name of the book, written by Shannon Sullivan. And, when a person's reading that article, you're not necessarily hearing the voice of the author. The author is very analytical and trying to understand issues of identity development around race. And sometimes hearing the author talk, it helps to provide an emotional understanding of where the author is coming from. Like the author is trying to dive into understanding, and sometimes hearing the author's voice is helpful for us to kind of gauge and remind that the author is just trying to understand a particular topic and issue. And then films provide us, like maybe it's interviews, maybe it's content, but also provides visual representation, which can be valuable as well. The content covers historical contemporary topics, mostly centered in the United States. There's a lot of different, different groups and experiences that are possible to talk about. And there's, unfortunately, we can't cover everything in this class. So let's talk, thinking about the history of different racial groups in the United States, thinking about different class experiences, the history of sexuality and gender in the United States. There is so much that's possible to cover. And hopefully this class is we're providing a framework that you can to understand and that you can apply it in different areas. And we're using or addressing some core areas of inequality. And by no means are we going into incredible depth of these areas or make covering a breadth of different groups and different experiences. And that's just the nature. 10-week class, we only can do so much. So our goal is to touch down variety of topics, gain an understanding to facilitate a critical examination. In my 201 class, introduction, we talk about the beginner's mind to approach things with fresh eyes. Um, Talking about class privilege, just as an example, may be different than talking about race privilege or gender privilege. It's important to have a beginner's mind that sometimes when we're presented with information we haven't thought about before, or it's new to us, or it's novel to us, and there can be a reaction to that, and we can get into a mode of reaction, defending territory, defending space, without first being, let's try to understand first, and then provide an assessment. And that can be difficult to do if we haven't if we're coming from a different vantage point or something that we haven't thought about or addressed before. So having a beginner's mind is something I encourage in all my classes. Talking about poverty and wealth, for example, and inequality. Sometimes people have really strong convictions about individuals who are experiencing poverty. And it's like, where does that belief and idea come from? Is that a belief and idea, is it based on data and information and objective reality? It's based on personal experience for sure, but it's important to suspend one's own personal convictions sometimes to be able to understand things in a more objective fashion. So this class is a survey class versus an in-depth examination of each of these different topic areas. And as I mentioned, it's historical, contemporary. And the focus is on understanding content, understanding perspectives, developing an analysis. Um, all the papers you write in this class, discussion board, what I'm looking for and what I'm encouraging the development of is demonstration of understanding. If I moved into a different content area, let's say I'm, as a sociologist, I go take a class in psychology, and the professor is coming at things from what's called like a sociobiological perspective that is putting a lot of emphasis on biological underpinnings to human behavior. That's quite counter to my training. It's quite counter to my understanding about human behavior and my approach to understanding human behavior. But for me in that class, I need to kind of suspend my own viewpoint for a moment and say, okay, what is this sociobiological perspective all about? Let me demonstrate understanding of that. I got to first understand it before I can critique it. And I want you to keep that in mind throughout the course of the term, is that generating understanding is what I'm looking for, is understanding, engagement. It's not about agreement or disagreement. It's like, okay, here's what the author is communicating. Here's what the author is providing. This is their perspective. Doesn't mean it has to be your own. It just, the role of you in this class, of students in the class, of any class, is to demonstrate understanding before we get engaged in any sort of debate. And this includes discussion board as well. So it's that demonstration of understanding. So it's not on providing personal reactions or debate. Doesn't mean you don't have a voice. It just means your voice is being placed in a space of like, hey, here's my understanding. Here's what this content is about. Here's what I understand it to be, and focus in that way. Um, okay, hopes for the term that you walk away with a deeper, more nuanced, and more dynamic understanding of structured inequalities, which include both privilege as well as domination, their histories and manifestations in contemporary society. Also, to increase your appreciation for examining structural inequality, the importance and the value of understanding inequality to promote a more democratic and just society. I think we all have that. I would argue we all have a vested interest in creating a more democratic and just society, and it takes work and effort to be able to do that, and it takes analysis and information to be able to do that. To make applications to your own educational goals, your own personal history. I think, classes are valuable when you can make connections to your own life and it assists in your own personal journey. And then to understand our own journey and the journey of others. Understand that experiences vary and be more aware of the unique experience of different groups and how I don't know, just historically contemporary society, different ways in which different groups have experienced the social world. And ultimately, it facilitates empathy, understanding of self and understanding of other. So those are overall goals, hopes. That's the class. That's the structure. If you do have any questions, let me know. And wish you well. We're going to have a great term. I'm optimistic about that. And yeah, welcome to Soch 212. Email me if you have questions, especially beginning of the term, just to make sure you're situated well and that you understand the structure and the layout of the class. And finally, if you ever want to connect and talk about the class content in more detail, let me know and we'll make that happen. All right, have a great day.